Look at the adjective. Play.
And I have half the brain that you do.
Right.
I told you. Oh, God.
Now is the franchise going to take the Viagra?
Gonna put some butts in the seat.
Hello there, wrestling fans, and welcome to episode 109 of Because WCW, the podcast where the big boys play. My name is the Twisted Genius Nash, and I'm joined as ever by my esteemed co-host, the DAZN sports journalist, Liam Happ. Good evening to you, Liam. How are you doing today?
Evening, I'm not too bad. Still upstairs in the last episode I was technically downstairs, but it wasn't much of a kitchen. But we are on the home stretch of the aforementioned house renovations. Hopefully we'll be able to take over from the contractors for the last few bits next week. It'll be just us running the paint around the walls and putting the new flooring in, which will be pretty straightforward because the father-in-law, the wife's dad, is a bit of a dab hand. So yeah, so soon we'll be back to the usual recording studio.
Excellent. Good news. Just in time for the spring. Yeah,
when I say recording studio, I mean like downstairs in the house. I do not have an elaborate setup.
Yeah, my recording studio here is a table in the kitchen. Yeah.
With some lovely British wrestling posters around the walls. I have to say, I have seen those on when we have done video calls, and it's a nice backdrop.
Indeed, yes. I am always on the lookout for more, but my rule is always that it has to be a venue that I've worked in.
So do you have a York Hall one already?
I do not have. I don't know if they did York Hall in the 80s. I'm presuming they must have, or maybe they did. But there's several other venues around London. I mean, the one I've got on my wall at the moment is the Town Hall at Wembley, aka Brent Town Hall. There's also, you can get. Well, I've seen ones for Walthamstow Assembly Hall, which of course was a venue that the FWA used many times in the past that you used to hurl abuse at me in.
It's true, it's very true. But that being said, Brent Town Hall is another one that FWA have run.
Indeed, yes.
I remember going to a show there in 2004. I feel like it got there was a bit of card subject to change. I'm trying to remember exactly where it was, but it was.
I think that was the one. Was that the one that Steve Corino turned up out of the blue, unannounced?
I think it was the one that Steve Corino did not make, actually. And I'm trying to remember because I think he was going to team with someone against Alex Shane and Hayde Vance, and I want to say.
I can't remember. I think that might have been the show where Jake Roberts was booked, came along, and then was sent home again, should we say? But
maybe. So this was the summer of 2004. Doug Williams main evented, and he retained the title against the Zebra Kid, and Ricky Knight turned on his son. As you do, because it's wrestling.
Yeah.
So I remember that much. Oh, and Flash Barker had a retirement ceremony. He didn't wrestle. He didn't have his last match. He just had like an in-ring ceremony.
Okay.
And then he came back like a couple of years later.
Yeah. No, I remember I managed Birchill against the Hampton Court, Duke of Danger and Simmons. That show. I think that was the only show. Yeah, I think that was the only show we did there. But yeah, so yeah, as I said, always on the lookout on eBay and whatnot to see what else is out in the old British posters.
Listen up, slapnuts. That's right. This is Jeff Jarrett, the chosen one, and you're listening to Because WCW. Now choke on that.
But today we are gathered here, as they say, because not because we're doing a watch along, not because we're reviewing a pay-per-view, but we have, as I said, anyone who's been following wrestling news knows we have had a pretty major loss in the wrestling business, namely Scott Hall, who passed away just recently. Went in to get his hip fixed, and it looks like, from what we can gather, there were blood clots that caused 3 heart attacks, and well, understandably, no one's going to recover from that. And yeah, we've lost a pretty major player in modern day wrestling at the age of 63.
Yeah. It's if you think about it, because if we and we have covered this topic on various topics of different type and category, but whenever we make conversation about who is WCW, and obviously Sting is one of the names that comes up. Ric Flair's an obvious one. Lex Luger's there. Vader's there. Goldberg's there. There's those names. You get the New World Order thrown up as a group, as an entity, without actually name dropping the Hogans, the Halls necessarily. But if you think about it, this is a guy who was around. I mean, it wasn't that long ago we covered. Was it Super Bowl one? And he was introduced in a segment with DDP as the Diamond Stud. He was only there for like a year, but he was part of that era that brings most of us to this podcast, that early 90s WCW worldwide over in the UK sort of era. He was a part of that. He then walked in with one of the most iconic angles in wrestling history when he announced that you know who I am, but you don't know why I'm here. And then we got, the company's biggest period off of that. Cultural zeitgeist, amazing times for wrestling as a whole, and even towards the demise of WCW, he was very much a central part of it. Even when he long made it was long since he made his last appearance, and those who've read the amazing book Nitro by Guy Evans will be familiar with some of the details of that, when Kevin Nash would constantly petition for him to be brought back on screen with no permission or anything like that. And there were Scott Hall cardboard cutouts, and there was a Scott Hall Easter egg gag in a world title match between Booker T and Jeff Jarrett. And then months later, there was no WCW. So not only was he part of the big part, which is obviously what everyone remembers, but he was on and off synonymous. He was a heartbeat of that company in so many different ways.
Yeah, so I mean, such a yeah. So I mean that night moment on that live Nitro, which we've covered in a watch along. I can't remember off the top of my head what episode number it was, or I'm sure I can find it later. But we covered that live Nitro, and that was the first 2 hour Nitro,
Mm.
and Scott Hall showing up unannounced on a live Nitro was really the thing that made everyone realize Nitro was the big show of WCW. And I know it sounds obvious now because with hindsight we all know that Nitro is the flagship show. But as we've seen when doing the watch alongs, at that time prior to that, Saturday night was the flagship show. That was where the big angles happened, and Nitro was almost secondary because they weren't they was trading trading WWF Monday Night Raw, and it was that famed 82 weeks, and all of that really the groundwork started with the arrival of Scott Hall and then Kevin Nash in WCW.
Yeah, it really shifted a change in the tone of the product, didn't it? And yeah, you're right, because we've done the Nitro watch alongs in chronological order. We're slowly but surely working through them. We're up to about, I think we're on the road to War Games 96 right now, aren't we, Dean?
We are
And
indeed,
and yeah, we had many 1995 Nitros watching the 1 hour ones where we were like, this is an enjoyable show, but they seem to be referring a lot of things that we're missing out on. And you get the impression very quickly that technically the storylines still revolve around Saturday night, and you get a fair few on Nitro as well. And that's absolutely right. The first 2 hour live Nitro, Scott Hall showing up, that was when it made the step up to the flagship, and he was right there synonymous with it.
yeah. It's episode 84 if you're looking for it. That's where Scott Hall debuts, walking through the crowd, interrupting the Mauler as we wasn't the Mauler was meant to be the new big gimmick, and it was clearly a massive bluff because it was just to distract us while Scott Hall turned up. But I mean, looking through his career, it's notable actually that the first time he appeared in WCW or the NWA as it was at that point was in 1989, because I remember, and this is only with the benefit of hindsight, of getting a tape of the Great American Bash '89, and the opening match is a two-ring battle royal, and it's basically just all these mid card guys that are just being given a spot on the show, and one of them with a sort of a bit of a perm and a big moustache is this big tall guy called Scott Hall. Um, doesn't really do anything. He does have a few TV matches. His debut on TV is losing to the Great Mutar. He then debuts on, I think he's on WCW Pro, and he loses to Terry Funk. And he is just essentially not enhancement talent, but he is a lower card guy who is basically staring at the ceiling every day. It's nothing, it's not quite clicking. Then he goes to Europe, to the German tournaments, the CWA, and I've seen some articles from the magazines over there where he was known as Texas Scott. And then he was in New Japan for a bit, and then he goes back, as you said, Liam, Super Brawl One era. He goes back to WCW in 1991 with Diamond Dallas Page, and he is the Diamond Stud, and that's where you can see the beginnings of the Razor Ramon look as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember every time there's like a historical tweet, they'll use like a classic old photo of Scott, and I'm talking like before a lot of what you've described there, like mid 80s, just breaking into the business, or just trying to get picked up by a school or whatever, and he'd have the perm and the stash, a proper 80s look.
Well, he started out in some territories as Magnum Scott Hall because of the Tom Selleck Magnum style moustache that he had.
Yeah, there's always some sort of look or gimmick that everyone's trying to replicate, isn't there? But yeah, he was very much fitting that bill. And one other thing that leaps off the page, because obviously he was he was a big, muscular, good-looking guy, but in an era where they really didn't want anyone on camera who was under 6 feet, he was still freakishly large compared to most of your typical ones as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, he was always like a weird frame because it's not a situation where you've got someone who's like 6'10" or whatever, and you built like you got someone in the Sid Vicious, Andre the Giant sort of height, and you can rebuild him as a giant. But this was a guy who was just a little bit under that, and yet could move twice as well.
Mm.
So yeah, he really had everything about him, and I think a lot of these companies were dying to try and make use of the physical package he had. And once he went and paid his dues, it wasn't long, and then straight away WCW went to play into his, his menacing size and his looks, and they're giving him this diamond stud gimmick, which, I mean, at this point in his career, DDP's like he's a light relief act in the mid card. He's not really wrestling much himself, so he's introducing this guy, and it's not going to get taken too seriously. And he kind of just went about a bit. I mean, there was always talk, wasn't there, of him getting a bit more of a profile position, but it wasn't to be. He kind of just did some stuff, had some matches, didn't really go past a certain point, and then it was off to the WWF where he really started to make some headway.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that was mentioned as a possibility when he was the Diamond Stud was that he was contemplated as being a member of the Dangerous Alliance,
Mm.
which, I mean, they didn't have a guy of his size in the Dangerous Alliance. So I can see him having a spot there as not not exactly the bodyguard, but
The muscle.
the muscle, yeah,
Yeah.
the
clean-up hitter.
yeah. Because you think about the size. All of the guys in the Dangerous Alliance were relatively similar size, so he would have stood out there. But I think most of all that would have given him a much bigger profile, because you think about what the guys in that stable went on to do. Some in WCW, some not in WCW, but it's an interesting what if, isn't it?
Yeah, well, even if like there were some frustrations later on for like obviously Steve Austin being the one that leaps off the page, but all five members of that group raised their profile within that group. You think of like Larry Zbyszko, who did form a good team with Arn Anderson, but it weren't like they were catching fire as this big entity, and they really managed to raise their profile and have some great feuds as a result of it. It just enhanced everyone involved in it because it was such a good, easy written stuff, gang of bad guys, virtuous good guys to oppose them, all sorts of combinations, all sorts of feuds, a
Mm.
great big all-time classic war games to blow it off. And if you've got Scott Hall involved in that, he's going to fit the bill nicely. So yeah, I think it would have worked quite well. But the way
Yeah.
things went, it weren't too bad either.
No, but I mean, I'm just thinking, if I think that at that time the Diamond Stud was missing, that obviously Razor Ramon and Scott Hall, when he was back in WCW as one of the outsiders, had, was that kind of that charisma, that connection with the crowd. I mean, the ring work was there, and the big moves and that, but the crowd he wasn't quite connecting with the crowd. And all I can think of is, like, if you put him in a group with Paulie Dangerously and Arn Anderson, and you've got Rick Rude in there, and Steve Austin as well, who I know obviously Austin started a long time after Hall, but Austin was an absolute prodigy in that respect. Yeah, you just think you put him in that group, and think about how much he's going to develop that side of his game.
And it's crazy to think that what 20 odd years later, you'd get almost like a sort of semi glimpse of how that could have worked when, for a brief period during the peak of New Japan's Bullet Club, you had his son Cody Hall operating as the muscle,
Mm.
I think they openly referred to him as the Bullet Club's young boy, the Bullet Club's rookie. Who was there to run interference, be the muscle, and he obviously would have been on that same sort of learning curve, Scott Hall, inside the Dangerous Alliance. A little bit further along, obviously, and we know in hindsight he was able to take his talents a lot further. But there'd have been an interesting little similarity in the way that two heel gangs operated and how the Halls worked into it, which is always a little comparison I always have in my head. It's a trivial one, but it's one I always liked.
No, it's definitely it's definitely gives you a glimpse into what might have been, definitely, yeah. And then as you touched on, he went to the WWF as this kind of Cuban bad guy gangster, Razor Ramon, and over the course of not a particularly long period of time, he became absolutely massive.
Yeah, because I remember watching one of. I don't know if it was his debut. I honestly don't. It was definitely very early on. It was one of his first squash matches, if not maybe his first. Try and remember if it was Superstars or Challenge or something like that. And I know Bobby Heenan was on commentary because he's obviously slaughtered this hapless dude he's facing, and then he's called for his finish. And at this point, even though obviously we had a little bit of access to WCW, I was still young at this point, and I hadn't actually seen him polish anyone off with his finisher as Diamond Stud.
Right.
And he's called for his finisher, and I always remember Bobby Heenan just like trying to guess what's happening. So he's going with a setup. He's like, what's he going to do? He's going to pole drive him. He's hoisting him up. So it's a power bomb, and then he's lifting him up with the crucifix. He's like, I've never seen someone held that high before. And then he's landed it, and Bobby Heenan's like, oh! I was like, that is the coolest thing. And Heenan just gave it such a great sell job on commentary. It
Mm.
was one of his first matches, maybe his debut as Ramon, and then not long after that, he was kind of like, I suppose, freelance hired by Ric Flair and Mr. Perfect to do some dirty work and help make sure Flair got the title back from the Macho Man.
Yeah, but straight in, first sort of program in the biggest promotion in the world, and you're right in the at the top level. I think even going back to like when he debuted in Florida, he was Dusty Rhodes saw his potential because he was very soon afterwards was feuding with Dusty Rhodes. So people often always saw the potential the guy had. It took Vince McMahon to realize that potential. I mean, we've talked on this podcast before about WCW or NWA era WCW's failure to create stars. It created Sting and it created Goldberg, and that was pretty much it. All the other stars that they had were either they were either stars already, like Flair and Dusty, or they became stars elsewhere and then came into the company, which obviously you'd put Hall in along with Nash and people like that.
Yeah, absolutely. They had to do that switch, and obviously that's what we want to see in modern wrestling. Really, when you've got those options, those alternatives, it ends up working to the wrestlers' benefit massively, and you want to see that. You want to see their pay go up, their profile go up, their bargaining power with the employers go up. This is good for them, and they, as it is one of the most infamous things about Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, they played it masterfully, and they really made some good money along the way.
Yeah, and I mean when, as we said, he turned. I mean, I remember at the time, when Hall turned up on Nitro, and it turned the wrestling world upside down because this was a different era. If it happened now, but like you think about it nowadays with things like the Royal Rumble guest surprises, you will hear, oh, so and so has been spotted at the airport at whatever city they're in, and the last Royal Rumble we had, if you wanted to, you could find out the identity of every single surprise before it happened. But this didn't happen at the time. The internet was in its infancy, and it really turned things upside down. And it was at that point, once Hall debuted, you were expecting Nash, which is why they didn't. It wasn't such a big dramatic entrance for Nash. He just kind of pops up at the side of the screen. But yeah, you can't understate how big a deal it was that this guy who was a massive star in the WWF just turned up on Nitro, because all due respect to Lex Luger, but Lex Luger in the WWF did not reach anywhere near the heights that Scott Hall did as Razor Ramon.
Yeah, Luger and Hall had the shock factor, which was good. And one thing I see a lot of people say about now is people complain about there's not enough surprise and things like that. The thing is as you kind of elaborated on, it's not easy. It's not always actually possible to do something like that. But absolutely, when it does happen, it's fantastic. And I like the fact you referenced the way they did the Nash one. Yeah, there was a little bit of expense there, and they played into it, because you'll see that now where, yeah, if CM Punk's return being a good example, everyone was a buzz over it, and they still managed to make it feel like a big thing. You can play it perfectly. I'm glad to see modern instances not feel like they have to do something for the sake of a surprise. But what was great about Scott Hall's return to WCW, it was the perfect storm of, they had that shock factor, they had that cultural factor, everything about it just worked. And everything that happened after that made it seem a bigger deal in retrospect, obviously, because obviously if they screwed up the angle, it wouldn't have been so great. You think it would have been like the Nexus, who in WWE had this big debut, and it was like nothing else you've ever seen. And then when they got squashed 2 months later, no one even remembers the really good part. So they did a good job of just turning this angle in such a thing where now it's an iconic debut. It's an all-timer.
Yeah,
It's great for all of the above.
yeah, and I think it's fair to say as well, and given the viewing figures that came about after that debut, but I think it's fair to say that Scott Hall debuting on Nitro and Kevin Nash teaming up with him as well meant that a lot of people who'd probably never watched WCW before, maybe even didn't know that WCW existed before, then started tuning in. So it made so many other people aware of other that there was this other promotion, that they had other guys on, and then you watch Nitro to see Scott Hall, but then you're also seeing the likes of Rey Mysterio and Dean Malenko and Eddie Guerrero and people like that for the first time, and then when the Radicals went over to the WWF, massive reaction for them because people knew who they were because they've been watching WCW, possibly because Scott Hall's defection had sent them that way. So it's this the old proverbial pebble in the water. It's this ripple effect from that debut and that 2 hour Nitro. All it just goes outwards and outwards and outwards.
Yeah, and like you'll get a lot of wrestling debates in the modern day that really get a bit like jaded and lazy, and one they like to throw out there because they don't have a clue what they're actually talking about is trying to brand wrestlers needle movers or wrestler doesn't move the needle. And as we saw with the Scott Hall thing, he went from being a low card guy to having a good run in WWF, but again, not he was never the next Hulk Hogan there. He was Intercontinental, a record-setting Intercontinental champion, had a good run, and he's gone through the gears another time. And thanks to that debut, thanks to the work that he put in, the character work especially, we've crowed about the production values of the New World Order angle, because everything was done in a great way. It turns out there's a legacy left by the good work done by Hall and all involved, and now people refer to the New World Order and Scott Hall. Oh yeah, they made things happen. They got everyone's attention. They moved the needle. It turns out it's not just a chosen one mantra you're either born with or you don't. You put the work in, and you have good people around you putting in the work in as well, and you just create this great thing. And that's exactly what they did there. It's not just one guy. Oh, he's just so cool. And Scott Hall was so cool, and the way he carried himself.
Mm.
But everything had to be done right for it to have the impact it did, and it did.
Definitely, absolutely, and you talk about the personality and the charisma and that, and I mean, we all know what WCW booking was like. Sometimes it was amazing, sometimes it was awful, and people's momentum went up and down. But whatever whatever they were doing with Scott Hall, whatever role or route they gave him, when he got in the ring and grabbed the mic and went, "Hey yo," everyone in that building was reacting. The pop was consistently huge.
Yeah,
He
he
never ever lost that.
he just had a natural presence, didn't he? Obviously, like physically, he had a lot going in his favour with his height, his size, and all that. But he adapted his look over time. He grew with confidence. He kind of evolved rather than losing his past. He would build upon what he's already had. Little callbacks to previous eras and things like that. Uh, and yeah, the whole package just snowballs, and it's good to see with certain wrestlers who don't lose their identity. They just build up and build up and build up, and that turns into such a presence. And he just had that. The more work you put in, almost the less you have to do, because he'd walk into a ring and he'd kind of just, especially in the New World Order days where, they'd fill the ring for a promo of like 50 people, and you'll have big guys growling, and you'll have other guys like shouting at the fans, doing everything to get some attention, put a bit of focus on them from this huge group. And Scott Hall's the one doing the least, and yet the camera was trained on him.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Um, uh, and it would be just something subtle to make you notice him, but like you said, not be the centre of attention.
Yeah, and even some little things he did. But one of my favourites was everyone remember when he'd mock the giant. He'd do
Yeah,
the Frankenstein walk and things like that. He just had these little things in that were just so no one would do a taunt like he would do a
the
taunt.
the wiggling fingers. So what it
Yeah.
was the wiggling fingers. Yeah,
There,
and sorry, go for it.
I was just going to add there's not too many modern wrestlers that have that sort of that grasp with their mannerisms. I'd say maybe like you're looking at a few like Kevin Owens springs to mind as being so good with just their little mannerisms and that, and it just sticks out in your mind. But there's not many more that are on Scott Hall's level.
Yeah, and another thing I'm just thinking of is like one of the most again an iconic moment in WCW, and iconic moment in Nitro history as well was the night that Goldberg beat Hulk Hogan to win the world title. But go back 1 week, and people don't always remember that the week before, the person that Goldberg had to beat, the member of the NWO he had to get through in order to earn that match against Hogan, was Scott Hall. Um, and that says a lot on two levels. One, that you needed somebody who was a big enough star, that big enough level to be a credible be a credible threat to Goldberg, and be a credible result for when Goldberg beat him. Because all due respect, if he beat someone like Vincent, or it wouldn't have any real meaning because everyone would be expecting him to win. So you've got that star level that gave Goldberg the shine, but then also, Goldberg was a relatively new guy in the most high profile match of his career to date. You put him in there with someone that can just steer him through if needed. Someone who what they're going to be like. Their work in the ring is always going to be solid, and that was Scott Hall in that situation. He wasn't chosen for that role by accident.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, though, correct me if I'm wrong here. I think didn't he face Scott Hall the same night as Hogan? I think
That
he
was
retained the
wasn't that
title
no?
earlier in the card.
I thought that was Raven. Didn't he beat Raven to retain the US title? Have I got that wrong? Was it the
He
night?
beat Raven to win the title the day after Spring Stampede. Raven was champion for one day. I feel like he beat Scott Hall to retain the US title at the Dome, and then later in the night
You're quite
won.
right. Yes, I've just checked it up. You're quite right. It wasn't the week before. It was the same night. Yes. Beg your pardon.
Because there was all that talk initially of Hogan Goldberg being just a dark match, wasn't there? And
Yeah.
I'm presuming Goldberg Hall would have been his one and done of the night had
Yeah.
they gone that route.
Yeah.
But
You're quite right.
but yeah, like talking of Scott Hall losing to people in WCW, one of the things that's always most well known is he happily went out there and lost to people that everyone else in the company of his stature would probably not even want to share a ring with. They'd get the Randy Savage nope story would come to life for a lot of top stars who wouldn't even want to wrestle certain wrestlers even if they were winning in 5 minutes. And Scott Hall was going out there and losing clean to Chris Jericho. He lost to Hector Garza, and he was happy to put people over.
Yeah. Sometimes it was a bit of the like slip, as the old saying goes, slipping on a banana skin type thing. But then he did that with Sean Waltman as the 1-2-3 kid and launched the guy's career. So yeah, he definitely did that. He definitely. I mean, they all had creative control in their contracts, and we know, we've spoken at length about the damage that did to the company ultimately. But I think out of all of them, Scott Hall was the one with creative control that would work with people a lot more. And what we've seen recently as well is people just sharing stories of his generosity. There's been someone I know who's a wrestler who has had their own mental health battles over a number of years, and obviously connected with Scott Hall in that respect. Um, and he basically was saying about how he'd had a certain amount of therapy and then had to stop because he couldn't afford it. And basically, he said that at the end of the show, or the end of the weekend, Scott Hall said, "Oh, can you come up to my room, help me with my bags?" And he did that, and Scott Hall basically gave him £1,000 so he could have some more sessions of therapy. And until now, that was never publicised. And there's been so many stories of his generosity and his charity in that respect, and being like a lot of the time, like having young guys on the road and paying for their meals, because he said, that's what the veterans do, and I presume that's what, when he was younger, that's what veterans did, and that kind of pass it on kindness, because if you have someone doing that for you, then when you're in that position, you'll happily do it for them. So you're leaving a legacy of kindness there.
Yeah, because I think like, again, like if I've got this a bit hazy, then fair enough. But I believe like Chris Jericho, one of the guys who obviously was the beneficiary of the of one of Hall's decisions just to lose to his scheduled opponent that night. I think he said it along the lines of, it was explained like, you know, what am I gonna gain from getting this win compared to what you can gain,
Mm.
and they're having like the NWO do a beatdown afterwards. What, like it was along the something like, why the hell would we just win the match and then beat you down anyway? And he saw it as, if he like loses this match even on a banana skin finish, that will really make people sit up and take notice of Chris Jericho and remember his name. And
Yeah,
then lo and behold, the NWO have got a massive reason to beat the crap out of him afterwards, and it's better
exactly.
TV as a result.
Yeah, and the live pop, and and going forward, you can still reference that this guy beat Scott Hall. So absolutely, yeah. And we, I think it's important that we also acknowledge. Obviously, he had his problems, his demons. We saw the best of Scott Hall, and we saw the worst of Scott Hall. We saw him at the very top, and we saw him at rock bottom. And I think the thing that to me is so heartbreaking about this is the fact that he'd had those demons and he'd beaten them, and he had the much publicized DDP yoga stuff, and he'd had people rally around him and help him out, and he was a success story, and an inspiration to other people of you can overcome this, and it to go through all of that and then pass away from complications from hip surgery. It's just it's that to me is the thing. That's the bit that really stings, that really hurts, that it's come about like this.
Well, I suppose you can look at it like that, but another way of if you think, I think Roddy Piper's a great example, who would openly tell everyone he does not expect to see 65, and he didn't.
Mm.
He knew his way of life and the physical toll. He knew he was spending years of his life for the life he ended up having. And Scott Hall obviously did. He lived at a very breakneck speed. Um, Eddie Guerrero's another one you think about, who had his problems, got himself sorted out, and and it shocked everyone when he
Mm.
passed away.
Yeah.
But yeah, the toll it ends up taking ends up being that case. I remember um, reading that Hall had like a traumatic upbringing, didn't he?
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
definitely didn't help with situations. And yeah, there's also a situation where, for all the stories we say of how he did these things to really help out somebody on their talent, there's just as many. There's probably one or two stories for each of those where he has been just really antagonistic and mischievous to his fellow man in the locker room, which is a shame. But yeah, like,
Yeah,
but
but we know that the cause of that was that he was having his problems, and and he overcame them in the end, and I think that you look at the reaction to this news, and there's just been an outpouring of love and of positivity towards the guy. I think even I think it's safe to say anyone that he antagonized, over time would understand that he wasn't in a good place then, and he he got himself better.
Yeah, it's a sort of bit you don't like condone that sort of behaviour, and you kind of really just hope that, especially an industry like professional wrestling, is just improving as a whole, and there's less toxic. You can only hope so. I'm not in a position to know that firsthand, obviously, but you hope it gets better than the sort of environments that happened in the 80s and early 90s, and gave us some of these tragic stories and such a frequent rate of demise. But yeah, his legacy as a professional wrestler is indisputable.
Massive, yeah. I mean, it's been reported in mainstream news outlets that that's the reach that the guy's got. But I mean, yeah, we've talked about the legacy of Scott Hall. Another thing we haven't mentioned yet is that it was Scott Hall who inspired the Crow gimmick in Sting.
Yeah, there was because that's been doing the rounds like
Yeah,
over the last few days for obvious reasons. Was the whole snippet where Sting had in an interview confirmed it, and everyone was saying like, well, was it? Oh, you should be like Brandon Lee in the Crow, or oh, you should just. By the sounds of what Sting was saying, it was basically just a suggestion that you go with the darker clothes
yeah,
and
the
the
image, yeah.
yeah just the lack of colour. You just go to the opacity, don't you? Really. But it was yeah, he credited Scott Hall absolutely with that suggestion, and they just ran with it from there, didn't they? The lot of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the words were rip. I'm not telling you to rip off Taker, but rip off Taker were the words he used. And again, look at what we 25 years later, and Sting is still using that image.
Yeah, we've seen his look evolve. Because I think the closest to a departure we've seen, and you remember about 10 years ago, he tried to do like a Dark Knight Joker style Sting,
Yeah,
which had a bit of a limited shelf life. I think he's done little things. I remember when he did his big title versus career match against Jeff Jarrett at Bound for Glory. He tried to go for like a hybrid of classic Sting and Crow Sting, and it was quite a nice look. It didn't really lie. There was a bit of red, white, and black in there. It was almost like he was trying to merge all those looks. But every time the base just ends up going back to more so than Surfer Sting. People see Crow Sting as his base look.
mm,
That is what he's known to be. When the wrestling cameras are on, and Scott Hall was just as influential on that as he was in a lot of other things.
yeah. And one other story that I don't think is particularly well known actually is that did you know if it wasn't for Scott Hall, there may never have been Johnny Storm.
Oh, really? Do tell.
Yeah. So before either myself or Johnny got into the wrestling business itself, we knew each other as fans. I lived in Brighton, Johnny lived in Hertfordshire, so we'd often the nearest shows to us would be London. Again, this is pre-internet, and we would basically find out which hotel they're at and go and just basically wait in the lobby of the hotel before when they got onto the coach to get pictures and autographs and stuff like that. And they're always, bless them, they're always very amenable and everything. um and Johnny would sort of take things a bit further. Sometimes he'd kind of dress up as a wrestler or something like that, but he'd get their attention. Essentially this was at a time when the WWF were coming to the UK a lot because domestic business was down and European business was up, and Scott Hall noticed Johnny and got talking with him, and anyone who knows Johnny Storm knows that he'll talk with anyone, and they struck up a bit of a friendship over time, and Johnny talked to him about his dream of becoming a wrestler, but this is as you mentioned earlier about no one under 6 foot was being employed. This was the land of the giants, and he didn't think that he'd got the size to be able to make it as a wrestler, and essentially Scott Hall just encouraged him every step of the way. Don't give up, and you just basically told him to find a training school and get experience, and every time he came over to the UK, they'd be in touch, and he kept in touch with him and find out how he was doing, and so really Johnny Storm was inspired and guided and by Scott Hall. If it wasn't for him, there he might not have taken that step to launch what's been a very successful 25-year plus wrestling career.
Oh, that's so good to hear. It's a really good story. And you think in an industry that's so full of people pulling the ladder up, so to speak, it's so good to hear like there are people like Scott Hall who do want to help people and the next generation and even their peers. Yeah, for all the stories that have gone both ways on Scott Hall, there's no denying that he really put in a lot of work to encourage and help, which is really good because as you know, Dean, a high tide lifts all ships, doesn't it?
Yeah, and he recognised, as we've said on this podcast before as well. He recognised that today's fans are tomorrow's wrestlers or wrestling people. We've seen Justin Roberts in the audience of a Nitro. Johnny Storm was in the audience of a WWF show, as was I. There have been lots of people in British wrestling that I remember being in the audience of shows. Andy Quilden, the promoter of Revolution Pro Wrestling, he was a regular at the Walthamstow Assembly Hall along with yourself in the FWA days. So, he recognised that just as much as anyone.
Nice, and it's a big theme even in mainstream wrestling. You think of the MJF CM Punk feud that was based around one of these fan meetings. Um, Chris Jericho and Ricky Steamboat played into that, and that was a lovely little unexpected rivalry when Steamboat came back for a few matches.
Yeah.
And even that, I mean, tie this into the Scott Hall thing. You think about that story from Jericho's book where when they did the match, they did a Honolulu leg, and I think that's where it was. Uh, I'm not, yeah. So, or was it Caroline? So somewhere with a connection to Ricky Steamboat,
Yeah.
and they're doing the things where he's wowing everyone and showing like his skills still there despite his advanced age, and obviously Chris Jericho, the upper card wrestlers going over, and the agents and Jericho decided they were going to have Ricky Steamboat to win in front of his connection crowd. I'm trying to remember, did they go to Hawaii or was it like North Carolina or
I
something?
think it's more likely going to be North
I
Carolina.
don't know. I'll have to check again. But yeah, there was just a big connection on that card, and they did that, and yeah, it connects to that whole thing about doing the old rivalry with your fans and playing up the today's fans, tomorrow's wrestlers thing on wrestling shows. And if you think about it, it's very much a Scott Hall move to put the other guy over like that from a guy who was a beneficiary of that from Scott Hall.
Mm,
Comes full circle.
full circle indeed. So, what is Scott Hall's legacy to the wrestling business?
He's a trailblazer. He's absolutely one of a kind. And one thing that gets thrown around a lot that I'm not a huge fan of myself because we know about how the circumstances work and how things have changed and all that. But when people say, "Oh, who's the greatest to not win a world title?" that gets thrown around, and there's a certain degree of trueness to it. But for me, he's more someone who proved that he never needed a world title.
I think that's a bloody good shout. Yeah.
He proved that as we're seeing certain companies now have a big load of talent at their disposal and only a certain amount of championships and AEW is a good example where they really rotate who main events any given Dynamite, any given pay-per-view. Yeah, we're seeing an environment now where guys like Scott Hall absolutely would rise to the top even if they were of this generation.
Well said. Very well said. Yeah. It's I when I think of Scott Hall, I just think of that. Yeah, that larger than life presence in the ring, and even when he was a heel, but obviously more so when he was a babyface. One of the things I always remember being taught is that as a babyface, you want to make the fans want to be you, which is like I guess why you sell merchandise. John Cena comes out in one of his bright T-shirts, and you see all these people wearing the same T-shirt that he's wearing. It's because they wanted to be like John Cena, and just just thinking about the familiar mannerisms that he had, because we always say wrestling, it's all about repetition to get things over, and just like seeing him performing live here in the UK, the number of people who would put their arms out like the aeroplane walk that he did, or point to themselves with their thumbs like he did, and it just remembering the number of people who wanted to be Scott Hall, because to go back to what you said right at the beginning, he was so cool. He was just so bloody cool, wasn't he?
Absolutely.
Oh man, Scott Hall, we will miss you, sir. We will miss you very much, and thank you for being such a huge part of such a such an important era of WCW's history, and of being such a huge part of one of its all-time most iconic moments.
This is Lance Storm, and if I can be serious for a minute, you're listening to Because WCW.
Well, thank you for listening, folks, to our tribute to Scott Hall. I think part of this was just a bit therapeutic of us getting this off our chest and just being able to grieve a bit for someone that we were great admirers of. You can follow us on Twitter at BecauseWCW, Facebook.com/BecauseWCW. We'll be back shortly, hopefully under happier circumstances. But Scott Hall, he may be gone, but we know for certain he will never, ever, ever be forgotten. Thank you for everything. Thanks for listening, folks. We'll see you down the road. Bye-bye.